Pitretnya saya berapa? Saya berapa? What the fuck? Oh, help some shit. Oh. Lama banget. Aduh, kategorinya gaming lagi. Satu juta dari mana? Uniqlo. Memang ganggu. Fix this lama sekali. Yo, what is this shit, bro? Oh shit. Bang. ¿Qué pasa? ¿Qué pasa? Upon the floor, Tar. Oh my. What the what the fuck is Hello? What the fuck? Hey? Oh, this dumbass, bruh. Tiba-tiba. Terus? Terus paste gitu. Set. Paste file. Wes. Semoga tidak crash adik-adik. Oh shit. Let's go. Anjay. Hello. Why is she lagging, cat? Mari kita nonton tutorial. Lupa ya. The fuck, gang? Yo. Kok nggak masuk suaranya? The fuck? Bentar. Kagak ada suara.
Hai pemain satu, siap hadapi tantangan ini? Masuk.
After I learned how to use Ableton, my life completely changed for the better. I'm not even kidding. I've used it to make hundreds of thousands of dollars and tour the world as an artist, and you could potentially do the same thing, but first, you gotta learn the basics. In this video, I'm gonna show you all the ins and outs of Ableton that you'll need to know in order to write and produce the best quality music possible. So if you just downloaded Ableton and you need an experienced shaman to show you the ropes, I got your back. Go ahead and open up Ableton and we can get started. Usually when you open up Ableton for the very first time, it's gonna open with a demo song loaded to show you what it's capable of. You're welcome to tinker around with this for a while, but when you're ready, go ahead and hit File, New Live Set. Now we have a brand new project. First, we need to
No. What the fuck?
dial in your preferences to optimize your workflow and get you set up just like a professional producer. Editor Ethan here. Just realized that getting your settings dialed can seem kind of boring, but keep in mind that you only have to do this one time and it's gonna make your life so much easier. So just follow along and I promise it'll be worth it. Okay, back into Ableton. So go ahead and just press Command, comma, and that's gonna open up preferences. You can also click on Live and click on Preferences. First, we're gonna go over to the Audio tab, and under the Audio Device section, we're gonna select our input and output devices. If you have an interface, just follow along and I promise it'll be worth it. Okay, back into Ableton. So go ahead and just press Command, comma, and that's gonna open up Preferences. You can also click on Live and click on Preferences. First, we're going to go over to the Audio tab, and under the Audio Device section, we're going to select our input and output devices.
Same shit. Okay.
If you have an interface, say an Apollo Twin or a Duet or a Scarlett, this is where you're going to select that interface. For this tutorial, I'm sending it to the screen recording software, and since I'm at home, I'm just using my MacBook Pro microphone.
Salah pencet mulu. Switch deh.
But this is normally where you would select your interface for both your output and your input. Next, you want to make sure your sample rate is 48,000. I usually select high quality here. And then for buffer size, you have a lot of options here. I would recommend staying between 256 and 2048. If you're experiencing a lot of glitching effects,
Wow. Fuck. 5.
and it seems like your CPU is spiking a lot, then try increasing your buffer size so that Ableton has a little bit more time to process things and it'll be less glitchy. But for now, I'm just going to stick with 512. We're not going to worry about anything else here. We're going to go down to the File folder tab, and we're going to turn off Create Analysis Files because it's not really necessary. Next, head over to the Record Warp Launch tab. For file type, we're going to make sure we have wave selected, and for bit depth, we're going to do 24. Then we're going to go down to warp/fades. And where it says loop warp short samples, we're going to hit unwarped one shot. We're going to make sure auto warp long samples is turned off. Just a quick note on this, basically all this is doing is saying when you drag in like a percussion loop or some sort of sample, it's going to warp that sample and adjust it to the BPM of your song. So let's say you have a song that's at 120 beats per minute and you drag in a shaker loop that's at 140 beats per minute. It's going to slow down that shaker loop and make it 120 beats per minute. The only issue is that sometimes it gets it wrong, and it also tries to do the same thing for certain effects and stuff that I actually don't want to warp. So for me, I just leave it off, but it doesn't really matter because we can always change it later. For default warp mode, we're just going to go with complex and create fades on clip edges turned off. Lastly, go to the very top tab here, look and feel, and you're welcome here to play with different themes. I like mid-light, and then you can adjust your zoom display here. I think 125 and stuff that I actually don't want to warp. So for me, I just leave it off, but it doesn't really matter because we can always change it later. For default warp mode, we're just going to go with complex and create fades on clip edges turned off. Lastly, go to the very top tab here, look and feel, and you're welcome here to play with different themes.
Yeah. Let's get that.
I like mid-light, and then you can adjust your zoom display here. I think 125 is great on this big monitor I have, but you can drag up to zoom Ableton. in, and you can drag down to zoom Ableton out. Okay, that should be enough to get you started for preferences. Now let's dive into the actual tour of Ableton. To press play in Ableton, you just hit the space bar. The metronome and BPM are up here to the left. So if I click on the metronome to turn it on and then press the space bar, you'll hear the BPM. And if you don't know what BPM is, it stands for beats per minute. And just think of it as the speed of the song. Now we can either click and drag here to change the BPM, or we can use the arrow keys to adjust it as well. Next, we're going to use the tab key to toggle between session view and arrangement view. This is session view, this is arrangement view. Now, if you're using Ableton and drag here to change the BPM, or we can use the arrow keys to adjust it as well. Next, we're going to use the tab key to toggle between session view and arrangement view. This is session view, this is arrangement view. Now, if you're using Ableton to write and produce music, you're probably only going to use arrangement view. So if you ever get stuck on session view, just press tab, or you can click over here to the upper right and you can switch between session view and arrangement view. Session view is usually used for live performance stuff, for DJing, so we're not really going to worry about that. Once you're in arrangement view, you'll see your tracks. This is where your sounds are going to live. I try to have a track for each sound type. So for example, I'll have a track for the kick, a track for the snare, a track for the bass, and that way I can adjust everything individually. Now there are two types of tracks in Ableton: audio tracks and MIDI tracks. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. Just think of it as an instrument that's on your computer. Now, from MIDI track arrangement view, so if you ever get stuck on session view, just press tab, or you can click over here to the upper right and you can switch between session view and arrangement view. Session view is usually used for live performance stuff, for DJing, so we're not really going to worry about that. Once you're in arrangement view, you'll see your tracks. This is where your sounds are going to live. I try to have a track for each sound type. So for example, I'll have a track for the kick, a track for the snare, a track for the bass, and that way I can adjust everything individually. Now there are two types of tracks in Ableton: audio tracks and MIDI tracks. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. Just think of it as an instrument that's on your computer. Now, for MIDI tracks in Ableton, you're going to use the piano roll to tell the virtual instrument what notes to play. Let me show you what I mean. I'll teach you these hotkeys in a minute, but for now, I'm just going to blaze on through and create a new MIDI clip. But basically, MIDI is just a piano in Ableton with the notes here. And you can click and draw the notes in like this, and then press play, and it will play the notes. So within Ableton, we have this piano instrument, and then our MIDI clip is telling the piano which notes to play. Hopefully that makes sense. This brings us to our next topic, which is VSTs. VST stands for Virtual Studio Technology. VSTs can be anything from a virtual synthesizer like Serum, or an effect like reverb or delay. An AU, or audio unit, is the same thing as a VST, but it's made exclusively for Mac. Now that you know about audio and MIDI tracks and VSTs, it's time to introduce you to the fades. These control the volume of your track. So if you look here to the right where it says 0, this is basically just the volume of the track. After I've clicked on it, I can use the arrow keys to turn these fades up and down. And you can hold shift if you want to get really, really specific. But I mix and master music for part of my living, and I almost never do anything more specific than a half decibel at a time.
I pay rent.
I
deserve to be here.
You can also just click and drag to adjust the volume, but my OCD really likes the 1 decibel increments. Also, you can press delete to just bring it back to 0. So we know how to control the volume of tracks, but what if we want to put effects on something? Okay, so here we have a snare track. It's just a dry snare. And we can go over here to the left where it says audio effects, go to the reverb tab, and then we can drag the reverb directly onto the snare track. This is part of why Ableton is so user-friendly. All you have to do is just drag your effects directly onto the track, and then once your effect is on the track, you can adjust the dry-wet to decide how much of the effect you want. If you turn the wet all the way up, you're just going to hear the reverb, and if you drag the dry all the way up, you're just going to hear the snare. I would say probably 90% of the time you're going to be putting effects directly onto tracks with this method, but there is another method worth mentioning. Just below the fades, over here to the right, these are the sends. Now, all these do is they send the signal down here to the return tracks. On the return tracks, you can put various effects like reverb or delay. And I'm pretty sure the default is reverb on the first one, delay on the second. And the advantage of using the sends instead of dragging the effects directly onto the track is that you get 100% of the dry signal, and then you have the reverb on top of that. These are great specifically for vocals, as we can get the pure original vocal with some reverb on top of it, instead of using that dry wet feature on the regular reverb method, which pulls the vocals back in the mix as you turn the wet up. So in the case of the snare, we have the dry snare sound. And then as we turn this send up, it's sending the snare to that reverb return track. So now we have the dry snare signal, and we also have the reverb on top of it. Okay, take a deep breath. Don't worry. And now we know which track information. After a little while in Ableton, you'll get the hang of this stuff in no time. And now we know which tracks are which, how to adjust the volume, and how to apply effects directly on the tracks and using sends and returns. Next up, here are a few hotkeys and tips to get your production process completely streamlined. The first and most important hotkey is Command S. This is how you save. I save religiously, and you should get in the habit of doing the same thing. Ableton is great about recovering progress if you experience a crash without saving, but it's always a good idea to save very regularly just in case. It's also a good idea to save each project or session in a folder dedicated to sessions. Let me show you what I mean. Go ahead and press Command S, and then navigate to your specific sessions folder. Name your project whatever you'd like, and then just click Save. Something else you might want to consider if you're starting to write and produce music for a living is you want to back up all your stuff. That's where today's sponsor comes in. Not in total folder on an external hard drive. So I just work exclusively off of a hard drive, and that hard drive is linked to Dropbox, so anytime I'm saving, everything is being saved online so I don't lose anything. Okay, so let's say that you want to share this project with a friend, or you want to open it on another computer. All you have to do is go to File, Collect All, and Save. Just to be safe, I would make sure all of these are yes, and just press OK. Now this is going to save all of the audio clips and all the little files into one project folder. So all the files are there and nothing is missing when you try to open it on another computer. It's good to get in the habit of pressing collect all and save. So that way all of your audio clips and everything are just in one project and you don't have to worry about losing it or trying to locate different files down the road. Trust me, it can be a big hassle. So Command S is to save, and that's standard on most programs. There are a few more standard hotkeys that I use all the time. I use Command C to copy, Command V to paste, and Command D to duplicate. To zoom in and out in Ableton, all you do is hover this mouse over this gray area right here, then you click and drag, and that'll help you zoom in and out. You can also move right and left, and if you look above this dark gray bar, there's a small representation of the entire project. So let's say we had a whole project here. We can use this top area and click to get to certain spots in the song really quickly.
What the? Fuck. Dirty shit. Sound like ass, bro. The fuck? What's this? Yes, like ass. That's all it is. What the fuck? Buddy. Ah! Buset dah. Uh, sleeping lonely.
Upgrade your vocal mix from this
How can we keep in touch?
to this. How can we keep?
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Lo-Fi Loft. My name is Tejo, and I'm really excited today because this is the first installment of the Ableton Live for Beginners series. Maybe this is your first video from me, but maybe you've seen me working with lots of MIDI controllers, or maybe you found my music theory series for beginners, and that series actually inspired this one. Many people are always asking me how to use Ableton Live. They want to understand the basics, and then a lot of people found that they really liked my teaching style in the music theory series. So in this monthly video series, I'm going to take you from knowing nothing about the DAW, knowing nothing about Ableton Live, starting from scratch, to being able to make your own music in the program. This is not going to be a comprehensive manual for Ableton Live. I'm not going to cover every single little feature. I might skip over things at certain times, but trust me, I do have a plan. I want to build you on a nice solid foundation, and my goal, like I said, is to get you to be able to make your own music in the program, not to make you a technical expert in the program. I hope that makes sense. So this is hopefully a practical approach. And I also want to thank DistroKid for sponsoring this series. I'll tell you a little more about them later. But first, let's open up Ableton Live for the very first time and learn how to navigate around the program and start recording our first sounds. Okay, so depending on if this is the very first time that you've opened the program, you might be looking at a demo project, in which case you can just go up to File, New Live Set, and start from scratch. If for some reason your screen doesn't look very close to mine, you can also go to Templates and find the file called Default Live Set and load that up, because that's where we're going to be starting from. Now, I'll also point out that I'm on Mac, so I'll reference things maybe like using Command, where on Windows you might use Control. And also, I'm using Ableton Live Suite, and I do recommend that you use at least Ableton Live Standard that up, because that's where we're going to be starting from. Now, I'll also point out that I'm on Mac, so I'll reference things maybe like using Command, where on Windows you might use Control. And also, I'm using Ableton Live Suite, and I do recommend that you use at least Ableton Live Standard. But just know I'm going to try to make this as open as possible and not use too many of the fancy features of Suite that might not be included for everybody. But also on Ableton's website, you can download a free trial and follow along with this if you want. Okay, so now that we have our blank slate, this is what Live pretty much looks like every time you open it. Let's talk about how to navigate around this, because if you've used other music making programs, you probably have noticed that it looks pretty different than other music making programs. And here's why. The first view that Ableton Live gives you is called Session View. And they give you 4 tracks to start with, 2 MIDI tracks and 2 audio tracks. MIDI tracks are for instruments that live inside the computer, like virtual instruments. Audio tracks are for when we're recording things outside of the computer, like with a microphone or if we plug a guitar in, that sort of thing. And right at the start, if you try to make any sound, maybe you even have a MIDI keyboard plugged in or something, you couldn't make any sound because we haven't loaded any instruments yet. How do we load an instrument? Well, look over here in our browser. This is where we're going to find all of the things that we need to make music, basically. There are these broad categories, one being sounds, which is just like a little too broad. So we're going to probably switch between drums and instruments for the most part. And these are the sounds that are contained within Ableton Live, like the sounds that come with the program. And remember how I said that the instruments in the program, the virtual instruments, those are going to go on a MIDI track right here, labeled MIDI and labeled MIDI. So why don't we go ahead and try to load up a simple synth. Now here's where this might get confusing. Let's click on Instruments. You might see a bunch of words here that mean nothing to you. And that's because these are a bunch of words that generally represent Ableton's stock synthesizers. Like if you went to a synth store and you saw a synth on the wall and it was called Juno Synth, that's essentially what this is. You're walking into the store and on the wall there are a bunch of synths. Operator, analog, collision, these are just fancy names for individual instruments. Let's just grab operator and drag it on to a MIDI track. We're going to click and drag it onto a MIDI track. Now there is an instrument on this very first track. And you might have also noticed that there is a red button here. I've just made it not red and made it red again. This is track arming. This is how we're actually going to be able to play the instruments or tell the program that this is the instrument we want to play. One important thing we want to click on here, if you don't have a MIDI controller attached, is this keyboard button here, which is going to allow anybody who's watching this video that is on the computer to use their computer keyboard, use home row, use the letter A, and just press it. And now you'll be able to start making sound. Play multiple notes on your keyboard. Stick to home row for now. A, S, D, F, G, H, J, K. That gives you a scale. This is going to allow you to use your computer keyboard to play in notes. But we need to check something in Live's preferences before we start making sound.
Learning guitar? Wait, don't touch that skip button. This is going to change everything. Look, everyone wants to learn guitar, but very few can actually
Go to Live, Preferences. And this is really important because we want to be able to actually hear what we're playing and what we're making. Go to Audio. I'm already on Audio right here. And select an audio output device. Now, my audio output device is set to my interface, but you might have headphones attached to your computer. You might not have an audio interface. You might just want to play out the speakers of your computer. So select speakers. Just select the one that works for you. I'm going to keep mine set to the audio interface and pressing the A key. With our first MIDI track armed, we are making a sound. And if you actually just play the home row of the keyboard, A, S, D, F, G, H, J, K, you'll have a full major scale. So great, we can play notes. Let's use that same concept again to load up a drum kit. So if we didn't want to play a synth sound, we could actually play some drum sounds. So over in our browser on the left, we're going to want to click on drums. And then we're going to just want to maybe click on a couple of these kits. And what you'll notice is when we click on these kits, we get a short preview of what each one sounds like. So maybe stick to one of the core kits as long as you have them in your library, and same process. Let's click and drag them on to this empty MIDI track. Now, if I accidentally took this drum kit and dragged it onto our synth track, our synth would be gone and it would be replaced by that drum rack. But I'm going to tell you the most important command when using Ableton Live, the most important keyboard shortcut, and that is Command Z, the undo button. Command Z. You press that and it undoes what you just did, that mistake you just made. That is probably my #1 key command that I use. So don't worry if you make a mistake. You can always hit undo. But now we have our synth and we have our drum kit. And actually the same thing will be true for the drum kit. We can use home row on our keyboard to make sounds. But as I'm pressing my keyboard, I'm not hearing any sounds. However, if you take a look at my screen, you'll see yellow lights lighting up within the drum kit. Those yellow lights are hitting drum pads that don't have any sounds on them. I need to go into a lower octave. I can do that by pressing Z on my keyboard. Now pressing A triggers that crash sound. If I press Z again, pressing A will trigger my bass drum. So maybe stick to one of the core kits as long as you have them in your library, and same process. Let's click and drag. Them on to this empty MIDI track. Now, if I accidentally took this drum kit and dragged it onto our synth track, our synth would be gone and it would be replaced by that drum rack. But I'm going to tell you the most important command when using Ableton Live, the most important keyboard shortcut, and that is Command Z, the undo button. Command Z. You press that and it undoes what you just did, that mistake you just made. That is probably my #1 key command that I use. So don't worry if you make a mistake. You can always hit undo. But now we have our synth and we have our drum kit. And actually the same thing will be true for the drum kit. We can use home row on our keyboard to make sounds. But as I'm pressing my keyboard, I'm not hearing any sounds. However, if you take a look at my screen, you'll see yellow lights lighting up within the drum kit. Those yellow lights are hitting drum pads that don't have any sounds on them. I need to go into a lower octave. I can do that by pressing Z on my keyboard. Now pressing A triggers that crash sound. If I press Z again, pressing A will trigger my bass drum. And as you might have guessed, playing home row will give you access to a selection of drums from that drum kit. Now, real quick, if your interface looks like mine with this center section that says MIDI from and monitor and audio to and all that, we're not going to use that right now. So let's get rid of that by pressing I/O. Great, it's gone. And just take a little note that their section that says MIDI from and monitor and audio to and all that, we're not going to use that right now. So let's get rid of that by pressing I/O. Great, it's gone. And just take a little note that there are these little buttons in places that you might not have noticed. I'll point out when they're important when we get to them. And one more quick thing to note before we go on is that there is a little window in the bottom left. If you don't have access to that window, just click that arrow there in the bottom left. And this is a very left. And one more quick thing to note before we go on is that there is a little window in the bottom left. If you don't have access to that window, just click that arrow there in the bottom left. And this is a very, very helpful window because if I hover over anything like the drums, it will say click here to access all of your installed drum presets. Great. Or if I click here, it tells me it's the track title bar, a clip slot, which we'll get to in a moment, and the arm recording button. It tells us exactly what that is. So if you ever need a reference, that guide is always there. Really quick, remember, we added in the drum kit, and what happened was it automatically armed the drum kit. So now, those are the notes I can play. I can even play them on my MIDI keyboard. But what if I want to go back to the synth? Well, we have to arm it. And now, and remember how we used Z to go down octaves for our drums? Well, we can use X to go up octaves as well. That works for the synths too. Now we're back on our synth because we armed it. And when we want to go back and forth between those, all we have to do is arm them. That is a really key function of live. You have to arm the track that you want to play. If there's no red light, it can't receive any information for us to play. One additional thing I'd like to show you in loading up sounds before we get to actually how do we record these sounds is, let's go back to instruments this time. And remember when we just clicked and dragged the operator synth onto a track? Well, I'm not going to do that this time. Instead, what I'm going to do is open this folder, which if you notice, there's a bunch of categories here, and these are types of sounds, because before we just dropped the basic version of the synth onto the track. But what Live actually has is a library of presets that all have a unique sound to them. And just like when we clicked on the drums, clicking on an instrument preset will give us a small preview of what the sound sounds like. And if it's repeating infinitely like this, just press the space bar and it will stop. So now what do? We've used up both of our MIDI tracks. Can we take this MIDI instrument, this bell instrument, and drop it on an audio track? No, we cannot. We see the no symbol there. In the bottom, we're getting an orange notification that says only audio effects can be inserted onto an audio track. So what do? Well, we can take our new instrument and drag it right here where it says drop files and devices. This is just like empty space. And you don't have to do this, but just to demonstrate that, if we find another instrument that we like, we can drag it there. If we find another instrument like, we can drag it there. And just keep filling that space. And as we fill it up, again, this is just for demonstration purposes. Oh, we're out of space. Oh, but it scrolls. We have a little scroll bar here. So you can just keep stacking and stacking instruments as you want. And do notice again that as I dropped in this instrument, it automatically armed. I can test it on home row with my keyboard, as long as my keyboard icon up here is selected. And I don't like any of those sounds that I just added, so let me just click on the title bar of a track where it says the title and press delete. Of course, I can right click and press delete as well. Delete, delete. And now just to test, go ahead and touch home row of your keyboard. You should not be hearing sound, or why am I not hearing sound? You should know, and it's because none of the tracks are armed. So let's arm track 5, the basic brushes. And there we go. We've loaded up another synth sound. And hey, maybe you're not even gonna record audio today. Like, we're not gonna record audio today. We're gonna do that in the next lesson. So I'm gonna click on both these audio tracks and delete them. Okay, so we've learned to load up sounds. We've learned how to arm them to start playing them. We've loaded up synth sounds and drum sounds, and we've kind of learned very basically how to navigate the browser between drum and instrument sounds. Now I want to show you how to actually record some of those sounds, record your musical ideas. But before we do that, let me tell you about the sponsor for today's video, DistroKid. Popular Tidal, Amazon content on this prolific. And you can upload, you pay once annually, you pay one time per year, and you can upload as much music as you want. No more paying per album or paying per song release. With a DistroKid account, paying $19.99 a year allows you to upload unlimited songs to all of those services that I mentioned and more. You keep 100% of your team, or if you're a singer, have other on all distro music and artist encryption to get video. And we've loaded up our 2 synth sounds. We know how to go into the browser, select instruments or drums, whichever we prefer. Let's use instruments as an example. We can select the name of a synth that we like. Maybe we'll select operator, or maybe we'll select analog. Dragging just the word analog in gives me the default setting of the synthesizer, but going into this menu here, deeper into the folders, gives me access to different presets. I can click and drag and drop a preset in, and if I do that on an existing track, it will replace it, and if I do it in this empty space here, it will add a new track. Let's replace it. It's armed already. We see a red light. I can use my computer keyboard to play notes, or if you have a MIDI keyboard, you can play your MIDI keyboard, and I can go arm a different track, play a different sound by clicking the track arm button, changing the octave on the home row of my MIDI keyboard until I get to the proper octave to play drums. And now I can play the drum kit. So we've made it pretty far, but how do we actually start to record ideas? This is all well and good if you want to just make some noise, but how do we record those ideas? And I started by saying that Ableton Live looks different than a lot of other music making programs because of session view. And right now I'm going to show you how to record musical ideas in this view, but I want you to do something with me right now and not get too confused. Press Tab on your keyboard. We have completely changed views. It looks totally different. Just take a minute to notice the way that this view looks is much more in line with traditional music making software. It's a timeline. Look at the time at the bottom here. These are seconds. We have bar numbers here. Don't worry about that if you don't know what that means just yet. But this is a timeline. And we're actually going to learn to record in arrangement view in the next lesson when we talk about audio recording. But for this lesson, I want you to be able to focus on being able to record MIDI, and we want to do it in session view. So let's go back to session view by hitting Tab and stay here. Just know that that's over there on the other side, and if you want to access and explore it on your own, you can press Tab to get there, or you can click this button up here. You can kind of see the difference between the two icons. I'm going to show you a very simple way to do this. However, we're going to build on more advanced ways in the future. So first, why don't we just record a drum loop to start? So we're actually going to create a blank clip. What is a clip? A clip can be a short musical idea or a long musical idea. It can be a loop, which is how we're going to use it right now. And each of these little rectangles on each track is called a clip slot. They can each hold a individual clip, individual musical idea, or individual loop. The fast way to create a clip is to click on one of these clip slots and double click actually. And we see a clip has appeared. And in the bottom window here, we're actually going to see where we're going to want to create our clip, create the pattern. We can make this bigger by stretching that right there like that. And if, say, you're not looking at this same screen, you're still looking at the settings of the drum kit, you can flip back and forth between these modes. This lets you look at the device, the drum kit, or the synth. This window lets you look at the MIDI clip. MIDI being how we sequence notes in these instruments that live inside the computer. So let's make a very, very basic drum loop here using bass drum and using snare drum. Just like I double clicked to insert a clip, I can also double click to insert notes in these little cells here. See all these little rectangles going across? Just follow my lead here and you'll understand how this works. We're going to double click in the first bass drum slot. We're going to put another bass drum note over here on beat 3. You'll notice this says 1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. That's beats 1, 2, 3, and 4. Don't worry about the other numbers for now. So we've got a bass drum hit on beat 1, bass drum hit on beat 3. Now find a sound that's like a snare or a clap in whatever kit you chose. And let's put that snare drum on beats 2 and 4. Remember, 1.2, 1.4. Now, we're not hearing anything, but you might have noticed that there is a play button on our little clip here. And if we press that play button, our clip will start playing. And as you might have noticed, it's actually looping. And it's going to keep looping. But how do we stop it? There's 2 ways to stop it. First of all, you can stop the whole project. You can stop everything by pressing spacebar on your keyboard. You could start it up again as long as that green play button is still there by pressing play again. And you'll also notice that this kind of master play stop and record button at the top here, the project is playing, not just this clip. This will come in handy when multiple clips are playing. We'll get into that in a minute. Well, if you wanted to stop the whole project but not using spacebar, clicking that stop button will work as well. Let's go ahead and click play again one more time. And if we want to stop this clip alone, the project continues to play, but just this drum loop stops. 2 ways we can do that. This stop button right here, or any of these stop buttons here, or this one here. I'm gonna go ahead and press that. And you might have noticed it didn't stop instantly, and we'll talk about why in just a moment. But since we so easily made that drum loop, let's go ahead and make another loop, same process, but on one of our synth tracks. I'll double click to create a blank clip. Here's where having a little bit of music theory knowledge will definitely come in handy. I've got my whole music theory series to help you understand scales, notes, and sounds, etc. But we can do this a couple different ways. We can draw the notes in like we did with the drums. So let's just go crazy and just double click a few notes in here. Less is more, especially if you don't know what you're doing. Just double click some notes in. You notice this is a piano keyboard here. If you stick with the white keys and you don't know too much about music theory or melodies, you'll be pretty safe. So I've just drawn in a bunch of random notes. Let me click play on that clip. So now our synth loop is playing. Let's click play on the drum loop. So this is how, in live session view, we start to layer sounds and layer loops. Now remember, pressing spacebar or pressing this stop button at the top will stop everything. Pressing spacebar again or clicking this play button will play all playing clips in the project, but using these individual stop buttons will stop individual clips on individual tracks. So now just the drums are playing. Let's bring back in the synth by clicking play. Notice how it didn't play immediately, but it sounds good. Let's stop drums. And let's stop synth. For your first Ableton Live lesson, being able to just create these little clips and little loops, have them play together, being able to load in new sounds if we choose, I feel like that's a big step. But I'll give you one more thing to play with between now and our next video lesson. You can click on any clip, right click, and duplicate if you want. You can also click on a clip and hit Command D, and that will duplicate a clip. Now the reason I'm duplicating these clips, they're exact copies of each other when I duplicate them. You see nothing is changing down in this window when I click on these. Same for the drums. Let's go ahead and make a drum pattern in this second row here. Let's add a hi-hat, a steady hi-hat. I'm going to do every other box here and create a steady hi-hat pattern. If you know a little bit about music already and music theory, then you can go to town and start creating your own patterns for sure. But this is just for everybody who's learning both music and the program at the same time. So now I have a version of the drums with hi-hat, but if I go back to this version and press play, it's a version without the hi-hat. Now, I'm going to stop that clip for now. Let's use the same logic with our synth clip here. We're going to take the same exact pattern that we made and that we like, and we're just going to make some changes to it. Let's go ahead and click on just a single note. You can like highlight like this, clicking and dragging. But we can also go to the edge of a note, make that bracket, and make these notes longer. Let's make just these two C notes super long. We could even just change the melody in general. Move these notes around. Remember, I'm sticking with the white keys because I'm assuming some of you might not know about music, and sticking with the white keys will give you a pleasant sound to start. So now we have two melodic clips. One other quick thing I'm going to show you, we can copy these clips. Right click, copy, or Command C, and we can paste them onto the other instruments. So now that same melody is on our operator synth. Let me stop the instrument on track 3 and let me play the instrument now on the operator synth. So the sound isn't kept in this MIDI file. Remember, these are just collections of notes, note patterns. Undo that, Command Z, remember. These are just note patterns that we can drag onto any other virtual instrument. So operator sounds like operator. And this instrument, this bell instrument, basic brushed, I'm going to use that bracket technique to make it bigger. Brush to bells, sounds like that. And now real quick, I want the operator to be less loud. Let's bring the volume of that track down. These big meters right here are each the volume of the tracks. And now let's press play on drums. And now this other duplicated track, delete the snares, and let's just make a 4 to the floor kick pattern. And one thing that happened here when I wrote in these kick notes is that they came in very quietly, because notes can either play hard or soft. You can adjust how hard or soft they're played by adjusting the velocity like this. Okay, we've covered a lot. Stick with me. I have two really quick things to show you. This track is set to a tempo, the pace of the track, right? But what if we want it to be faster or slower? That's this number right here, 120 beats per minute, or BPM. Let's lower it. I'm just clicking and dragging down to lower it. You can also just click in this field and type a number. Press enter. We can press 140. How about that? I like 90. And from there, we could build on this track. We could enter in different clips throughout here, all of these being empty. But what if we want to use our MIDI controller or our keyboard like I've showed you to play in these notes? Well, let's arm our track. Let's select this blank clip. Now this blank clip isn't playing yet. This one is, so I need to press play on that. We're not getting any sound. But now if I play a note, I'm using my computer keyboard, pressing G. Go an octave up. One more octave up with X. Just pressing the G key on my keyboard. Let's do G and A. I'm hearing the instrument. I pressed space to stop everything, but it's not being recorded. In this case, what we can do to record is press this session record button here. Live just counted me in 4 beats, but our red arrow here indicates that any note we play is going to be recorded into that blank clip. So watch the notes appear while we play them. 2, ready, go. And I stopped playing knowing that the loop was going to come back around. Let's get out of the recording mode by pressing that session button. It's not red anymore, it's just playing like a normal clip. And now we've recorded in notes into an empty clip. Of course, you might want a longer loop, so if you double click in and create a 1-bar loop, you can do things like duplicate the length. Now it's 2 bars. You can duplicate that again to get 4 bars, an even longer clip, which you can see takes a lot longer to get through. This is enough for you to start playing with and start making your own creations within Ableton Live. Like I said, we didn't record any audio yet. We also did not utilize the arrangement view. Remember, I pressed tab to see that. And there's a lot of other things we did not cover, but hopefully this is a good basis where you can actually start loading in instruments, playing them with your controller or your computer keyboard, and recording in basic patterns. There's other nuances to timing and how Ableton Live's clock and looping works, but we're gonna get to those in the future installments. For now, I know this was a long one. Thank you all so much for watching. Leave any questions, comments you might have